Hello, everybody, and welcome to Books in Hindsight. I'm your host, author Matthew Hines. Today we have an amazing guest. She wrote a book about the hypothetical life of Jesus. It's called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. Her name is Kristi Saare Duarte, and she's going to be up in just a minute. But before we bring out Kristi, let's just remind everybody that it is the holiday season, and we want to please encourage people to sponsor us on Patreon, subscribe wherever you are watching, say on YouTube, or listening to the podcast. We can also benefit from you going to Books in Hindsight or Heinessight.com and purchasing any one of either my books or clicking on the links to any of our amazing authors and purchase their books on Amazon, iTunes, Kobo, or Nook. All right, so that being said, we want to bring out Kristi Saare Duarte. We've wanted her on here for a long time, so let's not wait any longer. Let's go to the phone.
Welcome to Books in Hindsight, the only podcast where hindsight is always 2020. And we explore the great books, works, and ideas of the century. Now, here's your host, teacher, and author, Matthew Hines.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Books in Hindsight. As I promised you, I have the amazing author, Kristi Saare Duarte. She is with us. She's standing by, actually, right now. And before we get started, I just want to reassure everybody that this topic is something that may be sensitive to some people. And I know that we get, comments about certain, authors and about certain topics. But I just want people to know that here at Books in Hindsight, we do keep an open mind, and all viewpoints are accepted and valuable. And so I just want to preface this by saying that, and we are so privileged to have Kristi Saare Duarte on our podcast. So, Kristi, welcome to Books in Hindsight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this.
Well, thank you. And I had to kind of preface this because I don't know, what kind of reaction we're going to get. But so now we'll talk about the specific titles of the books we're going to talk about today. The first one is The Trans Migrant, and I believe this is a translation. And the second one is The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. Am I correct so far?
Well, The Transmigrant is not a translation. It was written in English. The Secret Life of Jesus Christ, I just wrote a foreword. It's written by Nicholas Notovich in 1880.
Okay, so can you explain that a little bit more, because I'm not sure. So the Transmigrant, where is that from, and what is that about?
The Transmigrant is a novel about Jesus' travels in India. So tying into what I spoke about, The Secret Life of Jesus Christ, many years ago when I was traveling in India, I saw a book on the street. You know how people put down a blanket on the street in poor countries and they sell books. And then I saw this book called Jesus in India. So I got very fascinated by it. I'm not Christian. I'm not actually religious at all. But the topic seemed really interesting. I picked it up, and it was a version of this book, The Secret Life of Jesus Christ, written by a Russian explorer in 1880 who traveled through India and ended up in this in the Himalayas in in a small town in Ladakh, which is right up in the mountains. And he broke his leg. And this is actually like the true story, right? So this Russian explorer traveled in India, broke his leg up in the mountains, was taken care of by monks, Tibetan monks, and was carried to the monastery. And as he was recuperating, one day one of the monks said, did you know your Jesus was here? And he said, what? What do you mean? And they had these old scrolls, like hundreds of years old. And the monk then started translating it to this Russian explorer. So many months later, he comes back to Europe. And in those days, the lingua franca was French. So he went to France and he said, look, I discovered these scrolls. And now finally we know what Jesus did during these so-called lost years that are not mentioned in the Bible. That is the years between when he was 12 and 30 years old. So 18 years that are not mentioned in the Bible. And the cardinals were like, I don't know if, I don't think you should talk about this. Are you looking for fame? Are you looking for money? We can give you money. Just don't talk about this to anyone. And to him, this was a true story. This was like a big, big discovery. So he wouldn't be silenced. So he published his book by himself, and then a lot of people from the church tried to kind of quiet it down and said, no, it's a fraud. Like they sent people to Ladakh. They said, no, nobody's ever heard of you. But there have been a lot of people in the following years have gone up there and seen the scrolls. So it's like, do they exist? I'm not going to say that, yes, for sure it's true, but I do believe they do exist. So when I started researching it, when I picked up this book then, in 2011, and started looking into the subject and started reading the New Testament and a lot of books, and it made sense. It was very logical that he would have, Jesus as a boy, traveled through Asia, studied Hinduism and Buddhism, because there are so many similarities between the religions. So then I'm a fiction writer, so I wrote a fiction book about Jesus traveling through India.
Okay, so that kind of makes it a little more clear. And that the fiction book that you wrote is the Trans Migrant.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I went over this, and it's a little bit complicated. So, in The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, this is the translation, or this is the Russian. You say Russian or Prussian?
No, Russian. From Russia.
And that he was so this is a translation of his book.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it was originally written in French.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that is quite interesting. And since it is just about Christmas time, and I didn't get to wish everybody a happy holidays, it's a really nice time to be talking about this subject, because I actually come from a faith. I'm LDS or Mormon, and we don't know where Jesus went, and in Oregon, like the religion that you're talking about, and of course this probably would have been, if it was Russian, it would have been the Russian Orthodox Church. Anything that makes Jesus seem like a human, they kind of don't want to know that much about it, and so he had to go somewhere. And so today we're just going to talk about some of the evidence just based on his teachings. And as you said, you read the New Testament that might actually confirm this. And I don't see, why some people would be really upset that you would say this, right? So have you had any of that? Have you had any resistance from your book, even though it is fictional?
It's funny that I expected more people who have read it read the book to come back and say like, oh, this is like nonsense. The only pushback I've really gotten are from people when I've put ads up on Facebook or on Instagram, and I say, I think the copy is something like, what if Jesus was an ordinary boy searching for enlightenment? And then a lot of people write and like, this is nonsense. Jesus was not an ordinary boy. He was God. And I just respond to them and I say, I'm happy that you have your faith, and, I'll let you be there. This is what I believe, so I am very reluctant to say this is true, right? So I think we all have our own truth, and I think we shouldn't try to convince other people that our truth is right. If it makes you happy, stay with it, But a lot of people have read the book, have said that they kind of had fallen out of love with Jesus, and the book made them fall in love with him again, because in my book, he's very inclusive, he's very loving. He says we're all God, we're all part of God, we're all connected. So, and it kind of ties together the different religions, showing how similar they are. So it's a very spiritual book in that sense, that like everyone is accepted, instead of saying this is the only way you should think. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And, you're just basically trying to do what, anybody, I think a person would do, is you're just trying to fill in the gaps, and you're doing it based on some new information that could be absolutely credible. When you just go look at the teachings of Jesus himself, and we are going to talk about that, but I just want to remind everybody we're talking to Kristi Saare Duarte, and her website is KristiSaareDuarte.com. And if you're listening to this podcast, it's available on YouTube. And the subject today, it is almost Christmas, and we are talking about Kristi's book, and it is a fictional account. Let me remind you, it is The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. So, Kristi, what's your interest in the topic? You say you're not really religious, so why even bother?
So, part of it is when I first came to New York. So I grew up in Sweden. My family is Estonian, but I grew up in Sweden. And when I first came to New York about 20 years ago, one day I was on a train, and this man came on board and he tried to give me a leaflet, and I said, no, thank you. And he started attacking me and screaming at me and saying, like, you're going to go to hell. Why don't you want to take my leaflet about Jesus? And he was standing there and pointing fingers at me and saying, look at this person. She's shaking her head, but she's like the devil. And I thought, well, if Jesus was of God, or even if he was God, right, he wouldn't want people to go onto trains and start attacking people. Who would say, hey, let me tell you a story. If you like it, you can come with me. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can still come with me, I thought that if you come from love, you would be inclusive. And I think anyone who is of God, or who represent God from any religion, are usually warm and welcoming and inclusive. And that just started, making me think about what in the Bible made people, think that it's okay to go and tell other people you're going to hell. So I was thinking about it for a few years. And then when I stumbled upon this book about Jesus in India, then I thought, maybe this is a way where I can kind of start looking at all the different religions and how they intersect, and what is the root of the religions and how are they connected. And And so it was just a curiosity about where did this come from and why, because when you look at a world today, like there are so many wars, there are so many people who say like only my religion is right.
Yeah, Kristi, I understand all of this, and I just want to jump in here, and I want to say that, in the old, I mean, you're talking about religious people doing this, but now, if you're not like you're in the U.S., if you're not the right political party, they attack you. So I think that there is it has something to do with religion, but it also has something to do with a human desire to control. And when you talk about something like religion, and I hope I'm not offending people, but when you talk about religion, it's very arbitrary, and you just have to say that, nobody knows what you do, but you just have to pretend that you're this superior moral person, and suddenly you're an intellectual, you're an authority on everything because you read the Bible. And so I think that we've gotten away from that, but we've gone to other, almost as crazy notions. So, but what research did you do before you wrote the book?
Tons and tons. I started with reading the New Testament, actually. First, I read the Secret Life of Jesus Christ, then I read the New Testament, then I started doing research online. I read more than 50 books. I tried to look at the different angles. I thought, I don't only want to look at people who agree with me. I want to look at people who think the opposite of me to see, is there something in there? I tried to, because I don't have a religious background. I mean, I grew up Protestant, but in a country that's very unreligious. I try to be as open-minded as possible and see what makes sense logically. So it took me 6 years just to do the research, and I read more and more and more and more. And then things started kind of like a puzzle falling into place. And what I believe now, I'm comfortable with. And to me, it is the most likely truth. But then if I could, I would love to go back in a time machine and see what really happened, because there are people who think that Jesus was a zealot. So he was like that. He wanted to go to war against the Romans. There are people who think that, oh no, he was the Son of God. So he walked around, holy, holy all the time. And there are people who think that he had thousands of followers during his lifetime. And there are people like me who think that he was just one of very many preachers in those days.
Right. Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, all right. So I want to just touch on So yeah, there were a lot of preachers, and what you're saying is true. But what I think is that this is just my opinion, but and it's going to actually lead to a question. So I hope you'll stay with me. But okay, so there's all these different ideas. Jesus was a zealot. Jesus was this. Jesus was that. And all we have in the Bible are, or the Bible that we know of, not the stuff that was left out, but the Jesus that we know of, he just talked about peace, and he was like a doctor, and he helped people, and he raised people from the dead, and pretty simple stuff. I mean, any like 5 or 6 year old could pretty much understand what he said. But everything that has come since then has kind of muddied the water as far as Jesus goes, right? And so you talk about wars and crazy people on trains. And so I have to ask about your book. Does your book celebrate the gospel Jesus, or another kind of Jesus?
I would probably say another kind of Jesus, in the sense that what I tried to do, I tried to focus on the information that was written within 40 years after his death. So in the first 70 years of the first century, the Gospels were all written after that. So Mark is the first Gospel, even though it's second in the Bible. It was based, they believe it was based on something called Q, like the source. And most of what we know, come from the letters from Paul's letters. And he, if I'm not mistaken, there are 12 letters in the Bible, 7 of them are considered authentic. So there's a lot of like you say, muddy water around it. So there's a lot of, I try to look at the most authentic sources. I took a lot from the Gospel of Thomas because it's only sayings, right? So I don't know if you read the Gospel of Thomas. It's one of the Gospels from the Nag Hammadi library that was discovered in caves in Egypt in, I think, 1947 or something like that. And so I tried to focus on what was the good, like something that I felt came from the heart instead of like the rules, because all the rules or the traditional vision or stories that we hear about Jesus are based on the Gospels and also the Acts. I think they're only called the Acts, right? So the Acts were written way after Jesus had died, long, somewhere 100 years after. And they were written by people who have never met Jesus or had never known anyone who had met Jesus. So it's really hearsay. And that's what we usually, when we look at a movie or read a book, that's the Jesus, that is kind of like accepted as the real Jesus. And I try to look at what he probably was like if you think that he was a man of God, so.
Okay. So I want to talk about a couple things here. Now, the first thing is, and I have to ask you, for people who are out there that say, well, Jesus never existed, we actually have what we would call now a mainstream or fake media reference, and that would be Josephus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if it were not for Josephus talking about this religious leader that was executed before the rebellion, we wouldn't, and he actually makes some nice comments. I can't remember specifically what they were, but he said some nice things, I think, about Jesus. But were it not for Josephus, people would really be able to say, well, that was all a bunch of Christian, zealots that were just making this religion up because they didn't like Jews or something. So,
right.
So, but we do have a historical reference to Jesus, so we do know that he actually existed. Now, then you talked about the Gospel of Thomas, and I have another YouTube channel, but I did a story last year because they had found new manuscripts from Thomas. I believe it was Thomas. Did you hear about that?
No, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say anything because I don't remember exactly correctly but he quoted Jesus, and the reason I quoted it in my video was because he kind of reaffirmed, like Latter-day Saint, beliefs, and I think it was something about the kingdom of God or something. But in those texts, he's more of a human being. More so than he is in the limited Gospels. So it's nice to see that. And so you added that stuff into your book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you basically, it sounds to me, and I'm just guessing, but you took all of this, all these outside sources and kind of did what do they call it in the FBI? You created a sketch, right? A psychological sketch of a person.
Yeah.
So tell us about him.
So it starts with the Transmigrant starts when Jesus is 5 years old, and he's in the synagogue, and he just loves the rabbi, and loves like the feeling of the church. I'm sorry, the synagogue, and he wants to be a priest. But in those days, only people from priestly families could be priests. So he gets very upset about this, right? Because he thinks he's super special. He's already talking to God, and because he has already the kernel of the divine in him, right? Even though he's not divine, he is very spiritual. So when he's 12 years old, then he meets a monk, because in those days, like the holy men would travel along the Silk Route and just spread their religion, right? So he meets this monk from today's Pakistan, and the monk says to him, well, in my country, I don't know why in your country you can't be a priest, because in my country, anyone can be a monk. So Yeshua, in my book, then, he says, wow, fantastic, I want to go to your country. So he goes home to his dad and says, hey, Dad, like, I'm going to sin now with this monk that I met in the market. And his dad says, no, under no circumstances, you're staying here, you're getting married, he's a little bit like famous in his village because he speaks very well in the synagogue. And they're like, we can get you like a rich wife, and like you're going to bring like more of fortune to the family. And he says, and Yeshua is like heartbroken. And in the middle of the night, he runs away, and he runs away with this monk. And then they walk along the Silk Route then to Sind, and then from Sind to India, and then up to the Himalayas, and according to the story that's actually in the Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, or the Secret Life of Jesus Christ, that this Russian explorer again wrote, that were in the scrolls in Tibet or in India. So he's very arrogant as a child because he thinks he's a little bit better than everyone else. So that's the part that I think some people are very uncomfortable with, because how can Jesus be arrogant? But to tell the story, he had to be, because he knew he was special. But as a child, you think the whole world, evolves around you. And like any child, he was the same. So he grows like little by little as he goes, like from one temple to another temple. And he always thinks, like, for most of his life, that he's a little bit better, that he's like, I'm ready to teach. And everyone says, no, you have to study first, then you can be a teacher. So I've made him very human. Like, he goes through puberty, he has a couple of love affairs, because I thought it was important to show him as a human being who becomes divine, in a sense, becomes divine, right? Because that's what I believe is the most logical story, right? It doesn't make him less of a role model or less of someone that you can adore just because he started from being a person.
Right. Okay, well, let me just jump in here for a second, Kristi, and remind everybody that we are talking about the book, The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. This is a fictional book by Kristi Saare Duarte, and it is, I must reaffirm, it is a fictional account. Now, let me just also say that for people that, there's going to be some people who say, well, how can you even possibly suggest that? And the fact is that we have young Jesus in the Bible, in the New Testament, and we have 30-year-old Jesus, 33-year-old Jesus, and nothing in between, except that somewhere along the lines, he got a lot of very different ideas from what was acceptable in Jerusalem and the local and I guess the rest of Israel. And all right, so let's talk about I hope I can ask you about this. Zoroastrianism, have we thrown any of that into the book?
Yes. So actually, the wise men that came when Jesus was born in the Transmigrant, and as it's believed, they didn't appear until he was a little bit older. So they believe these wise men. I mean, it's one of the theories that the wise men might have been from Mesopotamia. So in Mesopotamia in those days, the leading religion was Zoroastrianism. So he receives a golden ring that kind of like leads him through the story, and then he goes back to Mesopotamia in the end of the book and returns the ring and says, "I am not the God you were looking for," and he gives it back to them. Zoroastrianism, in a way, it's also similar to Christianity. I mean, it has some similarities, but they believe that there's a power of good and evil that fight each other.
Right. And so I wanted to touch on that a little bit. So in the Bible, I don't think we see Satan or any version of Satan until like the book of Job. Mm-hmm. If even there, and then we don't see Satan again until the New Testament. Is that right? Am I correct about that? So, yeah. So Satan really didn't even exist until the New Testament, and so and Jesus. I refresh my memory. Did Jesus? I know he was tempted, but did he specifically speak of Satan?
No, he didn't. This all came from Paul with his religion. That what I believe is that Paul, he was the one who made Christianity, and Jesus had a different religion.
Wow, I cannot believe how much time we've already been. Okay, because I'm not even anywhere near. All right, so yeah, okay, so
so Satan, I think, is something that came later. That Jesus didn't even go there.
Okay. So I want to talk about this idea then of, because I talk about it in my book. It's called Deceptions of the Ages, and it's about this principle, and I don't want to get too much into it, but of good and evil, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not in Jerusalem, it's not in Bethlehem, it's not in Israel, and it's not until you get out to like the Persian Empire. Mm-hmm. And as you go east, you get into China, and you've got the yin and the yang. And I'm not so sure. I don't know. I don't know that much about Hinduism, if they have an evil, a good and an evil. I know they have good and evil gods, but
right, not really. I think like they have Shiva, who's the destroyer, right? But it destroys something to build something new. So it's not really evil. It's just like I don't know, destroyer, create. You have to destroy something to build it up again. So
right, but again, in order to destroy, you must create. So again, the opposite thing. And what I talk about is how that relates to actual physical, physics. Having opposite things that create like a dynamo that keep things moving. All right. Well, that is so interesting. So yeah, it's incredible that you came across this, and I want to ask you a little bit. We share something in common, and that is you just went to Oman. What is your interest in the Sultanate?
I went to Oman because I like traveling, right? So I've traveled to about a little bit more than a third of the countries in the world. And I want to go anywhere where I haven't been. And because I had to travel in November because of work reasons, and I didn't want to go anywhere cold, and I didn't want to go anywhere where there was rainy season. I went to Oman, And it's funny because you lived in Oman, and this is such a funny coincidence, right? Before you and before this guy I met online who lives in Oman, I had never met anyone who lived in Oman. But Oman is, they say it's the new up and coming, travel destination. It's the Sultan Qaboos. He has done a lot of good for the country. I'm sure he's done bad things too, but he's done a lot of good for the country and is very revered. And one of the things he's done is that he's starting to build up the tourism, but in a way that supports the people in the country. It's not just for money. When people ask me how was Oman, I say, well, it's ultra safe, ultra clean. Those two things. People don't expect a Middle Eastern country to be safe, and they don't expect it to be clean. But I think it's probably even cleaner than Singapore. It's super clean and super safe. You can leave anything.
I don't know if you know this, but you can get a ticket if your car's dirty in Oman.
Yes, we found out after returning our car after 2 weeks. We said, is everything fine? Yes, but it's dirty. Did nobody tell you have to wash it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I got pulled over one time. I'd been all over the place, and I got pulled over. They said, they can't speak very good English, but they were wondering why my car was dirty, and I showed them it was full of diving stuff and camping stuff, and I'm sure it didn't smell very good. So I think they got the hint that I've been up on the streets of Hormuz across from Iran, actually. So I have to ask you, did you go to Salalah?
Yes, we went to Salalah. We actually drove from Muscat to Salalah along the coast and then back on the extremely boring 800-kilometer highway where nothing happened. But the coast was beautiful, and Salalah was beautiful.
Yeah, if you've probably never seen a RAV4 do 120 miles an hour, but mine did on that stretch of road. But it wasn't Salalah, so I mean it's right there on the Frankincense Trail. So isn't that so Old or New Testament? I guess you could take your pick, but isn't that really going back in history?
Yeah, it is. It's when I travel to places like that, I was in Tunisia last year, and it's kind of similar, but when you go to a country where it hasn't been overbuilt and overexploited, and you can go to the desert where there's not so much going on. I mean, you can drive for hours without seeing a house. That's when you really feel okay, it wasn't so different 2,000 years ago. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm somebody that loves history, and when I wrote 2 books about it because people would ask me about it, and I couldn't even begin to explain the people and the country and the things you can do, and you can do anything you want, and there's not very many people there. There's no traffic jams, and just everybody's so nice to you. And so, I wrote 2 books about it, and I still didn't even tell half of the story of Oman. But I just loved it, and getting off the plane and seeing, I was like, I'm in medieval times. So
yes.
It was just fantastic for me. All right, Kristi. Well, you've had a little bit of a break, so we have to jump back in to let's talk a little bit about the Trans Migrant. So this is explain to me what this is again.
The Transmigrant is the book about Jesus in India that we've been talking about.
Okay, and then the Unknown Life of Jesus is
the one that the Russian adventurer wrote.
Okay. Now, the one that the Russian adventurer wrote. Can you explain in case people kind of lost track like me, what is this? What is your connection to that?
This is the book that I found when I was in India.
And it's in English, or
it was written originally in French by this Russian explorer who went to northern India, and then he stumbled upon this Tibetan monastery, and they said, your Jesus was here.
Okay. So, and this is the one that you translated.
I did not translate it. I wrote a foreword to it. So I'm selling it under my name, but you can also find it online anywhere.
Okay.
So
right.
I wanted to write a foreword to it because I wanted to show the connection to the Transmigrant and how people believe that, like a lot of people say, like, oh, this is just a fairy tale and he was proven that he made it up. But that's not true, because a lot of people have gone to the monastery since and seen the books, and a lot of credible people. So that's kind of what I wanted to explain, something to counter all these people who kind of, like, if you go to Wikipedia, it says like, oh, this was a lie, because of course in Wikipedia you can write anything, right? So I don't know if it's true, like we will never know, but I wanted to like put it out there with my foreword to just say, this is what I found from all my research that I did.
Okay. And, as I cannot say this enough, but your idea and his idea are absolutely plausible. And so let's talk a little bit about what did Jesus say that that may, support some of these ideas. And didn't he say like the kingdom of God is within you?
Yes.
Okay, so isn't that kind of a Buddhist idea? And my reason for going along this line is that, as I told you, I grew up in the Mormon faith, and so much of what I see in what we're taught about Jesus and God and everything is really like Buddhism, and is really reflected in so many, mostly other faiths, but definitely in Buddhism. So, do you see, is that like a Buddhist principle, do you think?
I think Buddhism says that we're all equal and that we can reach nirvana through being letting go of nirvana. For me is the same as the kingdom of God. So it's something that we all can reach if we let go of desires and just, how can I say this? And live in acceptance, I guess. Mm-hmm. With, if you're happy with what you have, right, you find peace in yourself. And what is the kingdom of God? Like, what is heaven? It's peace.
Right.
And if you can find it in yourself in this lifetime, you don't have to die and go somewhere, you can find it here. Mm-hmm. So, yes, Buddhism has it. Hinduism has it. Christianity does have it. And much of what I wanted to do also that I really didn't speak about so much before is when I've traveled, like I've been to around 80 countries in the world, right? So wherever you go and you see people who are from different cultures or different religions or who look like outwardly look so different from you, but when you start communicating with them, which I'm sure you saw in Oman too, we're all the same. We all want the same things. We want to be loved. We want to be respected. We want to have food for the day. We want to live in peace. We want to have a roof over our head. And every religion, when you look like deeper into it, like what is the religion about? It's loving each other, right? It's treating each other right. That's all it is. So yes.
Yeah, but then, like you originally started out saying, not always, but it seems to boil down to that fear factor, and that's what seemed to have kept a lot of religions going. And, I saw, I learned about the Muslim religion when I was in Oman, and I saw a lot of very positive things from it. But what the roles of women, and there were some things that I said, I for myself, I couldn't do this. And there's a lot of Christian religions I definitely couldn't do. So I think that what you're doing is really nice because, what I try to do in my book is say that, there's no more miracles, and that, Jesus had to have been a human being. And so what if he was, so what,
Right.
like we say in the Latter-day Saint faith that, yes, he had a wife and a family. So what? He was a human being.
Yep.
And people just freak out about that. And how could you, but a whole, if you read into the Freemasons, and this is what my book is about, but he had a family and they went to France and they're the Merovingian dynasty, and the Freemasons invented this whole litany or pantheon of things around Jesus's family. So it's just a crazy idea. And it just, for me, I like to keep everything simple. And it's really nice that you are putting a face on Jesus. So, and it looks like you did a lot of, legitimate research, and you brought in a lot of the thinking of the time. So that's just fantastic. And I can't wait to read that book. I really have just been waiting to talk to you, but now I'm going to get out there and buy it. So
thank you so much. That's very nice.
Right. Well, Kristi, we have a few more minutes. I would just like to ask you this. On your book, I think I know the answer, but I wrote this question before I started. And I'm sorry to keep getting the titles of your books confused. But on the Trans Migrant, I'm not even going to, I just want to ask you, is it faith or is it science?
The book?
Yep.
I think it's faith.
Okay. And when I say science, I mean, you talked about, you did a lot of research, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't just sit there with a pen and paper and go, So
yeah, why I say it's faith and not science is because I wrote it from my heart, right? So I did a lot of research to get kind of the framework, but when I wrote it, I wanted it to be something that opens minds in the sense that some people can connect to, emotionally, and that's why I think it's faith in the sense, not religious faith, but just faith, because I think that if we all become a little bit nicer to each other, and somebody who read my book wrote that in one of their reviews, that once you finish reading the Transmigrant, you just want to be kinder to people. And I think that's beautiful. I hope that more than one person felt that way, but it is science too, in the sense that, I did research, but I think the story, I think any art form, you connect to the universe and you draw in that energy, and then it comes on, it puts it onto paper or into the dance or the song or whatever. So in that sense, faith.
Okay. So, but you say you're not religious,
mm-hmm.
But it sounds to me like you're kind of being faithful.
I am. I'm spiritual. I don't believe in religions for the reason that you mentioned before, that you have with Islam, you have these rules, with Buddhism, you have these rules, or Judaism. I don't believe in the rules. I think all the rules are man-made. I can't like something from Hinduism or something from Judaism, something from Islam, something from Christianity. I don't want to take all of it. I want to take what resonates with me, what I think has a higher vibration. So yes, I believe in God, but I believe we are all God.
Okay, and is that a Hindu or not a Hindu? Is that a Buddhist?
No, the Buddhists, they don't really believe in God at all.
Okay. But they do believe in nirvana. They believe in reaching heaven. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but all right. So well, since you're going to say that, I would argue that they don't believe in God, but everything is God, isn't it? I mean, everything is one. So everything.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I guess it's a question of semantics.
Yes.
All right. So then I have to ask you. You said it was. I think it's faith. You said it's a little bit of science. What about literature?
I hope so.
Uh-huh. Because it's very hard to do all three in one book, and I'll bet it's great literature.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the reviews say that it's very well written, so, but for me, literature, it's like saying, like you paint something and you say, oh, it's art. Yes, it is literature, but, I'm trying to be humble, I guess. I think it is a book.
Okay. Well, Kristi, I'm sure that it is a great book. I'm sure it is fine literature, but and if you pull it off, and I'll let you know if you did, but it's such a balance between, what you're trying to do, because you can't be off the cuff, because people are going to attack you for that. And they're going to attack you for being on the cuff. And then eventually, if you do the writing correctly, at least you're going to be able to, justify that, and a lot of people will support you. And I'll let you know, but I'm sure it's great, and it's such a great idea. And I mean, this has been floating around for a long time. I've heard it since I was a kid that Jesus went and studied in India. So
yeah,
it's not something that is completely foreign to people. So I'm really glad that you put it into print. And I just want to remind people, I don't get paid. I'm not endorsing Kristi's book, and I don't get anything from it. But I do have copies of her books for sale on Amazon, and links in the descriptions on my YouTube channel. So that's about it. But Kristi, I think it's just about time for us to go. Do you have any? I want to make sure people know where to get your book. You are at Kristi Saare. Say it for me.
KristiSaareDuarte.com, but to make it easier for people, because I know it's a very complicated name, you can go to Transmigrant.com and you get to the book page of my website. So that's the easier way.
Okay. So KristiSaareDuarte.com. And the books are the Trans Migrant and, of course, The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. Well, Kristi, what's in the future? Are you going to do any more books along these lines?
Yeah, so the book I'm working on right now is kind of a sequel. So it's about after Jesus dies, then his brother takes over the leadership of the disciples, and how he then fights with Paul, who comes with a completely different message. And it's kind of the struggle that who wins and whose faith wins. And then, as we know, Paul's faith wins, and that becomes Christianity. And Jesus' religion kind of dies with James.
Okay, now I just have to ask you this. You said Jesus' brother. In fact, he had a brother?
Well, in the Bible, you can read that he had a brother. And also, you mentioned Josephus before. Josephus writes about Jesus' brother James, and there's actually a lot more historical sources about Jesus' brother James than there is about Jesus. So we can say with pretty much credibility that Jesus had a brother called James. Of course, his name was Yaakov, not James, but still.
Boy, you got to hurry up and get that book out. When is this going to be done?
I'm hoping October of 2019. So I'm in the last phases of editing right now, and yeah, it takes a long time to get a book out.
Okay, yeah, I know it does. So are you doing self-publishing, or are you going through a publisher?
I'm doing self-publishing right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope you're going to have to come back. I'll follow you until you agree to come back. But
I would love to.
okay, great, Kristi. It's really, I was so excited to get you on here. I had all these questions to write down, and then I didn't write down the names of your books correctly. So I very much apologize for that. So I challenge everybody, go to Kristi's website and order her books, or go on Amazon or booksinhindsight.com or hindsight.com and get Kristi's book. All right. So, Kristi, I'm going to have to close off here. I think we've done an hour, but yeah, I really would like to have you come back and do the show again. And it's so nice talking to you. And I would really like to hear more about Oman. So,
yeah.
So it's been 10 years since I've been there. So, all right. Well, say goodbye to everybody, would you?
Bye. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Matt, for having me on your wonderful show. And then Merry Christmas to those who celebrate, and Happy Holidays to everyone who celebrates something different.
All right. And I'm just going to second that. And thank you again, Kristi. And for everybody out there, I have to say Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa. And I think that pretty much covers it. So goodbye, everybody. And please keep on reading.
This has been Books in Hindsight with your host, Matthew Hines. Please join us for our next podcast and look for our archives on iTunes and go to thehindsight.com. That's HEINES site.com for great books by Matthew Hines and other great authors.